Can somebody turn to Revelation 10 and read for us Revelation 10 verses 1 to 7?
And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot on the earth, and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth. And when he had cried, seven thunders uttereth their voices. And when the seven thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, seal up those things which the seven thunders uttered, and write them not. And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things that therein, that there should be time no longer. But in the days of the voice of the seven angels, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God shall be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets. And the voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me again and said, go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. And I went unto the angel and said unto him, give me the little book. And he said unto me, take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey. And as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter.
Thank you. So this is our little almost a little interlude in there between the sixth and seventh trumpet. And we're presented with this mighty angel that's come down from heaven. He's described as being clothed with the cloud, or with a cloud, a rainbow about his head, his face were as the sun, and feet as pillars of fire. Now, I'm just going to start off by looking at these various descriptive features that this angel has. I'm just going to see where else these appear throughout Scripture. So the first is the fact that he's clothed with a cloud. So if we can turn back to Exodus 13. Exodus 13. And can somebody read Exodus 13, verse 21?
And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night.
So the significance of the cloud here is during the day. I mean, at night it'll be a pillar of fire, and day it's a pillar of cloud. And when they were to see that cloud, what were they connecting that with? When they look at the cloud, who was in it?
Jesus.
Yep, absolutely. So they couldn't see God, they couldn't see Christ, but they could see the cloud. And when they saw the cloud, they knew that that's where God was, dwelling within that cloud. We turn forward a few chapters to Exodus 19, and can someone read out verse 16?
Exodus 19:16, and it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there was thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled.
So what's happening here? What's this describing here in Exodus 19?
I think that's when God came down upon the mountain. He was going to give Moses the 10 Commandments.
And when God landed upon the mountain, and he descended upon the mountain, and he was there speaking, what could they see?
Thick cloud.
A thick cloud. Again, God was in the cloud. He was shrouded in this cloud. And we'll jump to Deuteronomy 5 and verse 22. Can somebody read that out? Deuteronomy 5:22.
These words the Lord spake unto all your assembly in the mount, out of the midst of the fire of the cloud, and of the thick darkness, with a great voice, and he added no more. And he wrote them on 2 tables of stone and delivered them unto me.
And so again, that's, Moses at
Cloud.
the end of their journeys, looking back on what's happening. And when he describes God speaking the 10 Commandments and giving it to them, he says, when the Lord was there speaking, what we saw, it was the cloud that he was hidden within. We'll go to Psalms 104. And verse 3.
Who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters? Who maketh the cloud his chariot? Who walketh upon the wings of the wind?
So again, this time it's not being covered with the cloud, but it's still connecting the clouds with, God's presence, where he is, where he's traveling. And I find this one particularly interesting. Talks about clouds being his chariots. Can somebody turn to Revelation 14 and read verse 14?
And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle.
Now, what is happening in this passage?
Second coming. There's the sickle is for reaping.
Yep, absolutely. And how is it depicting this? Oh, sorry. So the sickle is being used there for reaping. And what are the other symbols here of when Christ is coming back?
Golden crown on his head.
Yep, he's coming back as a king.
Yeah, he's sitting on a cloud.
And so I find that just like we read in Psalms, when it talks about the clouds being his chariots, here again, he's using a cloud as a chariot, as he's returning as a conquering king. In chapter 19, he's pictured riding a horse. Here, he's riding a cloud as his chariot.
No.
She just stuck her head in the door and had this really cheeky look on his face, like, I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I am. Oh,
Sounds seriously cute.
yes.
That's the problem.
Yes. Okay, so Christ is coming back, riding this cloud as a chariot in his second coming. Turn to Revelation 1 verse 7.
Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Even so, amen.
Hmm. And so again, we see the same imagery connected with clouds here at his second coming. One final verse we'll look at is in Luke. Luke chapter 9. Luke 9 and verse 34 and 35.
While he thus spake, there came a cloud and overshadowed them, and they feared as they entered into the cloud. There came a voice out of the cloud saying, This is my beloved Son, hear ye him.
Hmm. So what's going on in this passage?
That's the Mount of Transfiguration.
Mm-hmm. And we're going up this mountain, and who is this speaking out of the cloud?
God the Father.
So this is similar to what we saw in the Old Testament when he spoke from Mount Sinai. This cloud appeared on the mountain, and God spoke from within the cloud. You know, with the pillar of cloud, Christ was in there, and he would guide them from within. And here in the Mount of Transfiguration again, this cloud descends, and God speaks from out of this cloud. So in all these contexts, in all the different verses we've looked at, the different contexts that they've been in, but the clouds are always connected with something. Okay, so what is the common feature in all of these passages?
It can be different, but quite often it's to cover the holiness of God from us, to shield us from his directness, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. And it's interesting, the ones like where it was running a cloud as a chariot, like at the second coming, when that happens, elsewhere it talks about God destroying them with the brightness of his coming. So in that sense, he doesn't fully veil his glory, but that is what destroys the wicked. And for the righteous, we are transformed so we can endure that glory.
Mm-hmm.
Petra.
Might be a bit of a side shoot, but I find it interesting. Clouds are visible because of the degree of moisture in the air. So, you know, we have the breath, God's spirit, we have the living water. When that's together to that degree, then it's visible. Just like when he's in us, that's meant to be visible.
That's a good analogy. So if we're jumping back into Revelation 10, the first thing we're told about this angel is described as being clothed with the cloud. And as we've seen, clouds are always connected with, or not always, but in these passages we've looked at, clouds are connected with divinity. God veils himself within the clouds, or he's coming with the clouds, he's riding with the clouds. And here this angel appears being clothed with a cloud. That's sort of our first indication that this isn't just a normal angel, that this angel is seen there having descriptions of divinity. Now, yes, Petra.
So clouds are connected with divinity, but aren't they also always connected with divinity coming into contact with humanity?
Yes, good point. Now, the next description we have there is a rainbow was about his head. Can somebody turn to Revelation 4 and read out for us verse 3? Actually, read verse 2 and 3.
2 and 3.
Yep, Revelation 4, verse 2 and 3.
And instantly I was in the Spirit, and I saw a throne in heaven and someone sitting on it. The one sitting on the throne was as brilliant as gemstones, like jasper and carnelian, and the glow of an emerald circled his throne like a rainbow.
So again, what is happening in this passage where we see this rainbow? Jaylene.
It seems to be an indication of where divinity is.
Mm-hmm.
Assurance.
But then it says there was a rainbow round about the throne. So is it in connection with the throne, or is it in connection with the one that sits upon the throne? Like if the Father was to move away from the throne, does the rainbow go with him, or does it stay at the throne? Or does it go with both? I don't know.
You know, I imagine it would go with him. I just think, you know, Christ talking to the Jews talks about, you know, what's greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold? You know, what's greater, you know, or it was the sacrifice or the altar that sanctifies it. You know, and it talks about the holiness doesn't, in this case, the holiness doesn't come from the throne, it comes from God who sits on it. You know, the throne is the seat the king sits on. If the king chose a different seat, that new seat would be the new throne, and the old one would just be an expensive seat. It's no longer the throne when, you know, when the king's not, you know, when the king's not ruling from it. And I think as well in chapter 10, when we see this angel, the rainbow's about his head. You know, there's no throne in sight, but the rainbow is about that individual.
That makes sense.
Merlene.
Can I just share something that I watched the other night on one of our church channels?
Yep.
About the rainbow, and I thought it was a lovely analogy. It talked about justice and mercy equals the rain, and the sun equals the rainbow. And so that you've got a combination of justice and mercy and rain and sun equaling a rainbow, which I thought was really lovely. Just want to share that.
Well, the rainbow is to be compliant with what the Lord gave us as a promise, that you never flood the earth again. And I'll look at it as an assurance. And then I look in Isaiah 12 or 53:12, and it says, "For the Lord will go ahead of you. Yes, the God of Israel will protect you from behind." So he goes before us, he protects us either way. And then when you read from Psalm 104:3, it says in verse 4, it says, "The winds are your messengers, flames of fire are your servants." So isn't the Lord assuring us to go ahead and presenting us with strength to endure whatever we need to in his favor?
Hmm.
And then I went to 1:7 in Hebrews, and it says regarding the angels, he says he sends his angels like the wind, his servants like flame fire. And it's about endurance, isn't it?
Hmm. It's interesting that passage you read there from Hebrews.
That was in 1:7. And then in 8 it says, but to the Son he says, your throne, O God, endures forever and ever.
Yes, yeah, it's drawing that contrast between the Son and the angels, and the significance of that is in Hebrew is it's under the Jewish system, angels were sort of the highest form of communication that they claimed to have. When an angel came to Daniel to deliver the message, or to Isaiah, or to the prophets, but he's saying that now we've had Christ come to deliver the message of God's will, what he wants from us. And so what we have is better than anything that they've had, because the messenger of Christianity is Jesus Christ himself, the Son of God.
Amen.
And that makes that revelation so much greater. And it's just interesting that passage you read about, he makes his angels spirits and his ministers flaming fire. That's from Psalms 104, which is right after the verse we read about he makes his clouds chariots.
That's right.
And so there again, talking about the greatness of God, it brings that into him, here who makes his clouds chariots, and we see Christ as the one riding the clouds as a chariot in Revelation 14, and the angels are sent forth to be ministers unto those who shall be heirs of salvation.
Hmm. And Ralph just shared something on the screen, but it's so fast I can't read all that on the screen. He mentioned God's promise there.
Yeah, it's a Spirit of Prophecy quote. You should be able to bring up the chat function and
Yeah, that's right. Petra told me that, but I messed all that up.
No worries.
Anyway.
Galen, and then I think Merlene had her hand up as well.
I'll send it to you, Norm.
Thank you. I'm a real dunce when it comes to that.
I find it interesting that when we look at a literal rainbow that we have in our world, it's white light going through a prism, and it splits into the colors that make up visible light. Obviously in the natural world, the raindrops, the water and the raindrops and the shape and everything, and the sunlight going through them being the white light, enables the rainbow to split. But this one says, and there was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. So does that mean that it's a green rainbow, or is there a shape to it? Or
I have never seen a fully green rainbow, but I have seen a fully red rainbow.
Okay, no, I'm wondering, because when you go back to Noah, God says that he says, I will put my bow in the clouds. And it's his bow. So yeah, I'm just wondering if there's a significance with that type of thing, or whether being a single color, or to do with the fact that it splits. Rainbows are a result of splitting the white light through prisms. I don't know. I just.
Yeah, I think it could be some of that, but the first thing that comes to my mind is, when John's describing the New Jerusalem, he says the streets are of gold, like clear as crystal, transparent. And so it leaves you with the question, well, hold on, are the streets transparent like crystal, or are they like gold? Because he said both. And in the same breath, he said both. And that leads me to just believe that human language fails to be able to describe the glory that is waiting for us. I just remember an Ellen White quote that was actually made into a song on the Pillars of Our Faith CD, if you've heard that, and really well done. And it just says, oh, that I could talk in the language of Cain, that I could tell a little of the glory of a better land. And she says, like to actually tell you what it was like there, we need to learn the language of heaven, because human words don't describe it. And I kind of get the idea that that's what John's seeing there when he describes a rainbow that's like an emerald. It's human words are failing him to describe the glory of what he's seeing, so he's just doing the best that he can.
Yeah, I've always with regards to the streets being paved with gold, looks like transparency of whatever description. I've always wondered, what angels think when we wear asphalt in our ears. Because it would be asphalt to them. So when we drape it around our neck and encircle our fingers with it and hang it from our ears, I'm just wondering what they think sometimes. It's like, well, it's building material for them. It's splendid as it is. It's like, well, why are they wearing asphalt? It seems a bit and impure at that. It seems a bit daft.
Merlin.
Yeah. A point I want to make about the analogy was that to make a rainbow, you need sun and rain. And of course, that understanding being, that rain comes into our lives. And Gayleen, I love your point about the green rainbow, because maybe we won't have multicolored or 7-colored rainbows in heaven for that reason, because a rainbow consists of sun and rain. You have to have the both, which, is kind of like our life, isn't it? Roses have got thorns, etc. So just a thought.
Petra.
Nice thought, Merlin. I like the way that God gives us samples down here. I think it's really beautiful that we have to learn the language of heaven to be able to describe that. It just gives us a taste that there is so much more. And this conversation with the rainbows had me think back to a lady that we used to know. She had a little plane here, and when the conditions were right, she would go up in her little plane and she would look for rainbows. And if you found the right spot, she said there was a rainbow right around the plane and you could fly through the middle. And it was like a circle plane. Cool. And she used to go looking for those circle rainbows.
God is flying up to Wellington. No, sorry, it was up to Auckland. And then I flew out of Wellington, but flying up to Auckland I did the trip around the North Island. On takeoff, there was some low cloud and we got above the cloud, and I looked out the window and there was the plane was casting a shadow in the cloud below it, and there was a perfect rainbow in a circle around the plane. And I saw that and it's like, we're on takeoff, and I'm like, oh no, I pulled my phone out, took a photo of it. And I was sitting in the window seat and I'm looking down, and like the next 3 or 4 people in front of me that I can see all got their phones out taking photos of it. We didn't crash, so that was good. But yeah, that was really cool to see this, just a completely circular rainbow.
The other thing that
Petra and then Gayleen.
The other thing that's really neat with, as you said, Gayleen, I was thinking about that too, the rainbow being the light refracted, broken up. God is light. He's that pure light. but he's got so many dimensions in him, you know, that sometimes there might be a bit of purple or a bit of green or a bit of yellow or a bit of, yeah, he's an artist. Just really, yeah, you know, we don't have to try and pin it down. We just have these little tastes and we can just enjoy the flavors and the, yeah, without having to stress about having to understand everything. Our God is that big that we can't, but we can enjoy the tastes he gives us. Sorry, Galen, go for it.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I think the only reason we don't get circular rainbows upon the surface of the planet is because that, you know, the Earth itself gets in the way. That's why we end up with half circle ones. I think the true rainbows are circles. Yeah, and like it says here, there was a rainbow round about the throne. It doesn't say over, it says round. I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not. I don't know.
Good point.
That's a really neat picture of the continuity of God's light.
Ralph just shared that quote from Education that the bow above God's throne represents the union of his mercy and justice.
It's mercy and justice.
There it is.
Yep.
And that is the essence of the promise. The promise is that mix of mercy and justice. So when we jump back into Revelation 10, and we see that this mighty angel also has a rainbow upon his head, that's a second indication, just like the clouds, of divinity. That this is how the Father is described sitting on his throne. And this angel comes down having this same characteristic, that the same rainbow upon his head. Milleen.
That description is very similar to the first chapters in Revelation, talking about the seven churches. It sounds like a description of Jesus, really, more than an angel, doesn't it? His face is like the sun and his feet as pillars of fire. It's very similar in description as the description in Revelation 1, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you want to read that out for us? In Revelation 1.
Yeah, it's
Not there, from 13 through to 16.
Me?
Yep.
And in the midst of the seven candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp two-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shining in its strength.
Yeah, we got the two descriptions. The angel was described as his face was as it were the sun. And there in verse 16, when it's describing Jesus, his countenance was as the sun shining in its strength. And again, the final descriptor we have of that angel is his feet were as pillars of fire. And here in verse 15, it describes him, his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace.
Yep.
So with all 4 of the descriptions we're given of this angel, I think you're sort of bang on the money there, where this fits a description of Jesus.
Hmm.
You know, the first two are specifically with the clouds and rainbows, specifically associated with divinity. And the second two is how Jesus is described in chapter 1. Galen.
Didn't we discover in Daniel that Gabriel had feet like that as well?
Yep.
Oh,
Do you want to read that out for us?
Oh, what chapter was it again?
Daniel 10.
Daniel 10. Oh, hang on, Ezekiel.
Daniel 10, verse 5 and 6.
Okay, hang on. Daniel 10, 5 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man, excuse me, clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like beryl, was like the beryl, and his face appeared, and his face is the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps as fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and his voice of his and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude.
Mm.
And that was Gabriel, yeah?
Yeah, because later on when this individual here speaks, he says, you know, there's none that stand with me in these things but your prince. You know, and he says that, you know, I was there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia, and then Michael came to assist me.
It's interesting. Something I noted when we were looking at this the other night was his feet, well, his arms also, but his feet were like polished brass. Whereas with Christ, it's glowing, you know, pillars of fire as if they were in a furnace, as it says in chapter 1. So is there a something greater, you know, something for the likes, you know, higher up the chain, as it were, comparing, you know, polished brass versus glowing brass, like you would, you know, when metal is, you know, molten in a furnace.
Yeah, there is that. So that there is those slight differences. Like here, his face is the appearance of lightning, whereas in Revelation, it was as the sun when it shineth in its strength. So there is a similarity, but there's still a difference.
Yeah.
But there are other things like here. It says his in Daniel 10, his eyes as lamps of fire, and in Revelation, it says his eyes were as flames of fire.
So it sounds like Gabriel is, in all those aspects, a step down. He's not on the same level. But could it be that because he's a holy angel, you know, the character is similar? Obviously not the nature, but yeah, there's a similarity there because they're both holy beings.
Yeah, it's
one's divine, obviously one's not, but holy nonetheless.
Very similar. It's just everything sort of just like one rung down. But what stands out to me the most is comparing these two is why it's, you know, there's this sort of one rung down, everything is just slightly less, but how similar it is, how similar that the glory that God's given to a created being is, you know, how, you know, just, you know, God, sort of the extent of the blessings that God poured out on his creation. You know, God didn't sort of hold back anything for their blessings. How close to himself he made them. And that just speaks to about, God's loving, wanting to pour out everything he could. But, when this getting a bit off topic, but just when you think of that, of all that God poured out, all that God had given him, and when Satan received all that, all he could say is, I want more. He didn't look at how close he was to God. He just looked at the little bit that was missing, the little bit lower. If he's like,
Glass half full.
I don't want to put sort of that percentage on it, like he was whatever, but the description is so close. But instead of looking at all the stuff that he was given, he looked at the little bit that he didn't have, and focused on that till that became the entire sort of means of his existence, is complaining about this little bit that he didn't have. Petra, then we'll go Ralph and Merlin.
Very similar to what you were talking about, just thinking about Lucifer when he was third in command in heaven and how magnificent he was. So Gabriel has taken that spot. And we know that Lucifer, in that point, he spent a lot of time personally with the Father and the Son. So we can also see that Gabriel now would spend a lot of time with the Father and the Son. By beholding, you become changed. That magnificence of the Father and the Son, that spending that more time with them, you can't help but be impacted. What is the lesson for us? The Father and the Son want to spend that time with us, and that awesomeness, they want that to rub off on us. So Gabriel spent that time, and we can see from this description in Daniel just how much of the magnificence of the Father and the Son has become his just by being with them. So I don't know if that's taking too much license, but it paints a nice picture in my head.
Ralph.
I was just thinking about the brass feet. Everything in the courtyard was made of brass, representing the earth. And since Jesus, walked among men on earth, so that's what I reckon his feet represent, his mission he did on earth. What he went through, is having become one of us and done that.
That's an interesting thought. I haven't thought about that before, but yeah. It is interesting. Just like, Isaiah talks about how beautiful are the feet of him that preach the gospel. Christ's feet, and the glory was when he was on earth. Yeah. Interesting. Merlin.
I was just going to say that Satan's description of not having the little bit that he didn't have is just the epitome of sin, isn't it? It's just selfishness. It's just total self, concentrating on self.
I was listening to somewhere today among everything I deal with. I can't remember where it was from, but the man was obviously coherent in all that he was talking about. He was talking about the brain and the synapse of bad thinking and the vibration it gives off as far as electrical vibration. And he said, what you put in it, the synapse always comes out with that vibration you put in it. And I was thinking of Philippians 4, verse 8, where it says, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting them in practice and so on. And it will bring us our peace from the Lord that guards our hearts and minds. So he's protecting us, he's guiding us and commanding us actually to keep our thoughts positive. And when I share with the group or groups what is in store for us beyond our imagination, their relentless thoughts and torment we can all go through of what's going on and how everyone's being persecuted by the enemy, it tends to give them strength, you know?
Hmm.
It's the same with, and I've had many medications for all kinds of things for PTSD. And I remember going in before I left country this last time, and I had a Steps to Christ, a few of them, and the leader said, "Oh, you can't bring those in here because that's a secular group. You can't share religious things." And I said, "I've talked to these men before." I says, "I've been through it. You give us medication, you calm us down, and you think we're all okay, and we're vegetables. And because we're not in jail and fighting and whatever else, you think we're all okay." And I said, "I've talked to these men, and they're tired of that. And frankly, I'm tired of that." And so I had so many of the books, and everyone took one. There was only one book left over, and I looked at him and I said, "There's one left for you." And he had to grab it, but I found out later that he was Christian, and I went through a program called Prolonged Exposure of going through all the bad stuff, and it actually is 80% good. And so he took me on that journey, and so the Lord brought a lot to himself there, you know, just by positive thinking, you know. And I don't take any meds anymore. The Lord saved me from a lot of that, and positive thinking does a lot.
Hmm. Absolutely. Petra.
Interesting your comments, Norm, with the strengthening, because if you grow seedlings in a very sheltered place, they'll get tall and skinny, but they won't be able to handle it. You grow them where there's a bit of wind, they grow stronger and they can handle it. Same as I'm assuming it's the same for people, but if you've got a horse with ligament problems, if you can take it in a pen, sure, the ligament will heal, but then when you let it back out in the paddock on the hills, that ligament will give straight away. Whereas if you leave it out on the gentle hills to heal, it will heal under load and it will heal strong. So, you know, God has given us these parallels in nature to help us to see that trials are to strengthen us. They're to show us how strong God can be in us. They're a strengthening, positive thing. Uncomfortable, sure, but it's not about that. It's about comfort.
Amen.
You are so blessed with assistance, Matthew. I hope you're grateful.
Yes, they do bring a lot of joy. Oh, it's one of the hardest things. They're doing something like that. They just look so cute that you got to try. Don't laugh. You're trying to tell them off. Yeah, but back to Revelation 10 though. One last point on this angel. So the angel appears in the beginning of chapter 10. And it's going on. We see it in verse 5. It stands with, you know, 1 foot in the sea and one on the earth. It lifts its hands up to heaven. And then in verse 8, this voice speaks from heaven to John saying, "Go to this angel, get the book." He goes to it. And then in verse 9, read, the angel speaks to John. He says to take the book and eat it. It shall be, it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. And then John continues, he says, and I took the book and out of the angel's hand and ate it up. And it was in my mouth sweet as honey. And as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. And he said unto me, so the angel was the last one to speak to John. This is still the angel speaking. And he said unto me, thou must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. And then we get into chapter 11. It carries on with this, what he's prophesying about. It says, and there was given unto him a reed like unto a rod. And the angels stood, saying, rise and measure the temple and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months. And remember, this is the angel speaking here, and he says, and I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days. So this is the angel speaking here. And when we get down into chapter 11, it's still the angel speaking. And speaking of the 2 witnesses, the angel calls them my 2 witnesses. So that's another indication. This isn't an angel, but this is in fact a divine being. This is Jesus Christ himself. Margaret.
Chapter 10, verse 2, he had in his hand a little book open. Is that little book Daniel's book?
There's a lot of good evidence to show that it is. In Daniel, there was this book that was to be sealed until the time of the end. And as we go through, the angel stands up and declares, there shall be time no longer. That connected with this little book gives this bittersweet experience. They're told to prophesy again, and there's this measuring of the temple. And we find that all these things link in with this time prophecy that was after the time of the end. Daniel was told to seal up that message until the time of the end. And so this prophecy here in chapter 10 is happening in that time of the end. And so that book of Daniel has now been unsealed and has been opened. And as we're going to go on, we probably won't get to it tonight, but we will see that that book has this experience with God's people that is described in the latter part of chapter 10, moving on into chapter 11. But the final question where we have this angel, if this angel is in fact Christ, why is it simply described here? Why does it simply say a mighty angel? Why doesn't it say, as elsewhere in Revelation, it's the Lamb, it's one like the Son of Man? You know, it's all these other descriptions of Christ that it clearly presents. Why does it just simply say an angel here, or a mighty angel? Why does it speak of Christ as an angel? Merlin.
Because angels are messengers, so maybe it's just the connection between a message to be given and the angels, even though it's not an angel. Don't know, just a thought.
Petra.
Similar line to what you were thinking, Merlin, I think. Is it because the focus here is on the message rather than the messenger?
Yeah.
That's a question. Feel free to answer it.
Sort of partly, but I think there's a lot of other description that goes into this messenger. You know, it goes to well, not really to length, but 4 different descriptions, so we know that this angel is Christ. And so it wants us to focus on who the messenger is here. But so it wants us to understand that this is Christ, yet it just says it's an angel. And I think that what I get from that anyway, I think similar along the lines of Merlin, and part of that is it's focusing on his role here. His role as he has this important message to carry. And part of the significance of the message is encapsulated in the fact of who is presenting it. You know, just think it Christ at his baptism, you know, when he was declared, you know, that he's the Son of God. You know, who was it that brought that message? It wasn't just, it wasn't just one of the angels. It was the Father himself that brought that message. So I mean, you don't want to say that the message was more important than the messenger when the messenger was God the Father, but the message was so important that it had to be brought by God the Father. So I kind of agree that the focus is on the importance of this message, you know, and that's why Christ is here as the messenger, but the importance of the message is seen by who the messenger is. Ralph.
Well, one of his identities is Michael the Archangel as well, so we have that too.
Yep.
And this isn't the only message he's actually brought to the earth. He was standing by the side of those that were writing down the scriptures, it says somewhere I've read, you know, through his spirit. So
well, that's in I think it's First Peter, talks about, you know, the prophets that searched, you know, what manner of time the Spirit of Christ which was in them did signify when it testified beforehand the sufferings of Christ and the glory that should follow. He refers to, you know, it was the Spirit of Christ that brought those messages through the prophets. But also in you know, in Hebrews as well. Where are we? Hebrews 3, it says, "Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Christ Jesus." You know, so it says Christ was an apostle. He was also a high priest. You know, these were both positions that were fulfilled by humans. And in the same sense, Christ is an angel, though that's a position that's often fulfilled by angelic beings. Just like Christ is an apostle, he was a prophet, he was a priest, he is a king, he's also a messenger. It's just one of his many jobs.
All good things through the Father.
Petra.
I think it also makes so much more sense understanding that scripture makes it clear that there is the Father and his Son and their Spirit. So for Christ to come and deliver this message, he's not giving this job to some other being. He's doing it himself. So that sort of helps make sense of all of this more, because it just fits with the rest of scripture.
Now, in verse 2, it mentions that he had this little book open in his hand. And it says, "And he set his right foot upon the sea and his left foot upon the earth." Now, what do you think the significance of that is? That he's got one foot upon the sea and one foot upon the earth? Eileen.
I think we can, to me, the sea and the earth could be the whole world, like it encompasses everything. But there's also the other factor of, that the sea is a populated area, and the earth obviously is the opposite. So I don't know if that's in this case straddling parts of the world, populated and sparsely populated, although I don't know what the population would have been like around this time as far as the New World goes. But yeah, I don't know whether it's to encompass the whole world, both sea and land. I mean, that's the whole planet, isn't it? Really, it doesn't kind of leave anything out.
Hmm.
But I think I'm just talking through a hole in my head on this one. Sorry.
Petra.
It is what your mouth is, Galen. Don't want to shock you, but is there also a thing of a statement of dominion here? Because we see in Daniel, the beasts come out of the sea and they come onto the land. So in having a foot on the sea and the land, I understand that a part of this is talking about encompassing the whole earth. But is there also a statement of dominion there?
Hmm.
And that's a question that you're welcome to answer.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting, as you mentioned it in Revelation 13, you got the two beasts there. One comes out of the sea, the other comes out of, the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. And, 13 also hikes back to Daniel 7, where you got all the beasts coming up out of the sea. These are the places where you could say the satanic forces try to exercise dominion. But this angel is sort of standing over both, ruling over both. He has the authority over all those areas. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that stands out to me anyway, is that it speaks of sort of this global message. If we talk about something that compass land and sea, it's sort of a euphemism we use to talk about it's global. It's a message that's going far. I think if we go into verse 3, it talks about, and he cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth. And when he cried, the seven thunders uttered their voices. So again, this is a loud cry that goes out, and it's has that sort of exclamation to it, as when a lion roars. This is a loud message that again is to go out into all the world. I'm thinking of the angel's message, the first, the third, and then in Revelation 18, that fourth angel that repeats the second ones, these all go out with loud voices. It'll be a message given around the world. Now, this is something that I find interesting, somewhat puzzling. So Christ is here as a messenger, right? He's here to give this message, this worldwide message, with a mighty loud voice. And when he opens his mouth to cry out, as the seven thunders uttered their voices. Read that in verse 4. It says, and when the seven thunders uttered their voices, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, seal up those things which the seven thunders uttered, and write them not. Now that seems puzzling, and to contrast the first bit, this Christ turns up with this message, this important message to give, this to spread across land and sea, with a crying out with a loud voice, and then that message is sealed up and John's not allowed to write it. What are you guys' impressions of that? What do you think about that? Galen.
Not an impression so much as what does, yeah, the Bible's its own dictionary. So what does thunder, elsewhere in the Bible? Because I think there's a couple of passages in Revelation, but we also see it, I think, on the top of Mount Sinai, when you got, the thunderings and lightnings and the fire and the smoke and the bits and pieces. So, just wondering what sort of context thunders is in, biblically, scripturally speaking.
We can look at some verse of that soon. We'll just get these other comments. Petra.
Go for Margaret first. My train might come back.
Okay, Margaret.
I'm surmising Daniel had to shut up his book till the time of the end. I wonder whether in the future God will unseal these just before Jesus comes, perhaps, whether there's a message he still needs to reveal to his people. Maybe it's the day and the hour that he will come. I don't know, but there were seven thunders that uttered their voices, so there's several messages. I just think it could be something that is yet to be revealed.
Hannah.
Sorry, I've just come in late, so I'm not sure if it's fitting with the rest of the context. But what comes to mind for me is when the Father proclaims the day and the hour of his Son's return in the last days. It is said to sound like thunder that God's people understand, and those who have not chosen to be God's people don't understand it. It just sounds like thunder to them, or something that they don't understand. And maybe the sound of the seven thunders, or what they uttered, maybe John was asked to seal that up and not write it because it was not for his time. Maybe it's something that God will yet reveal to us.
Petra, has that train come back to the station?
Yep. Steamed on in. Very similar to what you were saying, Hannah. Ecclesiastes 3, there's a time and a season. The little book for Daniel that was sealed back in his day. In this part here, that's now open. There's seven thunders. There's a message, but that's not for now. So there is a message here also that there are things that God will unfold, and there are things that God will hold off on because he has the whole context, and we need to trust him. But he's making a statement. There are things here that are not for you for now. Trust me. And we can do that.
Can someone turn to Exodus 19? Exodus 19 and verse 16.
And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled.
So again, there at Mount Sinai, we read this verse out earlier, and there again, just describing God descending on the mountains, and it describes these thunderings and lightnings. And again, after he spoke the 10 Commandments at the beginning of chapter 20, in verse 18, we read, and all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpets and the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. So it describes when God's present on the mountain, he's speaking, it describes it as thunderings, lightnings, all these things are accompanying the voice of God and his presence upon that mountain. Can someone also read for me 2 Samuel 22, verse 14?
Second Samuel 22, what verse, please?
Verse 14.
14. The Lamb thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his voice.
So again there, thunderings are paralleled with the voice of God. Can someone read Job 37 verse 4?
Then comes the roaring of thunder, tremendous voice of his majesty. He does not restrain it when he speaks.
And so again, what is the thunder paralleled with there?
Well, verse 5 says God's voice is glorious in the thunder. We can't even imagine the greatness of his power.
So again, God speaks with a voice of thunder. And again, in Job 40 verse 9, it says, hast thou an arm like God, or canst thou thunder with a voice like him? Speaks of God speaking with a voice of thunder. And Galen.
I just had a thought, and that is all these seems to be speaking of the Father speaking with a voice like thunder. And we are told in the New Testament that Christ has a voice of many waters. So if it's Christ that's in Revelation 10, if it's Christ that is the messenger, then it must be the Father that's speaking. Or it seems to, sorry, am I jumping ahead? It seems to indicate that it's the Father himself speaking. So would that not go with what somebody said before about the Father announcing the time and the hour?
It could do, although I'm not necessarily wanting to say what these thunders are, because
I understand that.
John was specifically told to seal it up and not write it down, so we don't know. But yeah, and it is interesting that, you know, you have this voice, or the thunders uttered their voice, and then we hear this voice from heaven speaking. And through chapter 10, you have several voices speaking. There's the voice of the angel, there's John himself speaking, and then this other voice from heaven speaking. And there's
Well,
this
I know
change between these three.
well, Jesus can obviously do anything he likes within his character, and throwing his voice is something he could probably, more than likely do. But we don't have any, throwing one's voice would be deceptive. So that doesn't make sense from a character point of view. So it only makes sense that it would be the Father speaking, because their voices are obviously scripturally are very different. One's the voice of many waters and one's like thunder, or so it seems thus far.
I'm sorry, my program's just not responding at the moment. Trying to turn to another verse, but it's taking its time. Well, yeah, we looked at a few of these verses that speak of thunder being associated with the voice of God. There's a few extra ones in Psalms. But can I get someone to read John 12, verse 28 and 29?
Father, glorify thy name. Then came there a voice from heaven saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. The people therefore that stood by and heard it said that it thundered. Others said an angel spake to him.
So who's speaking there from heaven?
That's the Father.
And how are the people standing by that are listening, how are they describing that?
Thunder.
Yeah, some hear thunder. How else is it
Angel.
described?
Angel.
Yeah. So I think Hannah made the point that not everyone hears this. And so it's interesting there when you get the Father speaking from heaven, some people just hear thunder. Other people hear the voice. They don't necessarily just discern it. But there are other people that do hear it and understand it. So you've got these, different groups of people. And so I think that's sort of in the seven thunders here, that's speaking to this sort of future message that is going to go out in this time that not everyone is going to hear. The thunders, to some people, it's just thunder. It just sounds like noise. To others, it's the voice of God. And so that very much could match up with when God the Father declares the day and the hour. His people hear it. Everyone else just hears this great noise and it's just a noise of thunder. We don't know what these seven thunders are, but there are seven messages in here that have been sealed up and not written down, but they are messages that God has for his people that they will hear. Ralph.
This one of John, was that when he was speaking for the Greeks? Because they could understand what he was saying, didn't they?
Yes. In John 12, the Greeks went to see Jesus at the temple. And Ellen White actually has an interesting comment on that. She mentions that, some said it thundered, others, said it was a voice of an angel, but the Greeks that were standing there, that they heard the voice and they understood the voice, and that it was declaring to them, who Christ was. So they heard and understood it.